And so tonight's presentation is titled Restoring Nature in the UK's National Parks. And our guest speakers are Naomi Conway, Director of National Parks Partnership, and Ross Powell, a member of the Palladium Group. Naomi is Director of National Parks Partnerships, providing strategic leadership for national partnerships between the commercial sector and the UK's 15 national parks. In this role, she has helped to establish Revere, an award-winning collaboration between the National Parks Partnership and Palladium that is leveraging private finance at scale to restore nature in protected landscapes. And Ross is helping to deliver private investment into UK nature at an unprecedented pace and scale as part of Palladium's nature-based solutions team. Ross's role is to identify ethnically aligned business and investment partners and connect them with the portfolio of high-quality, large-scale projects within the UK National Park network and beyond. So at this point, I'd like to welcome and pass over to our two guest speakers tonight, Naomi and Ross. Over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Great to be here. Thank you for joining. We're both going to be presenting today. Ross is going to be driving slides. I'll start off and then pass over to him. But yeah, it's great to be here. And as Rob said, I work for all 15 of the UK's national parks. It's my pleasure to work for those places, and that's spaces ranging from Cairngorms or Loch Lomond up in Scotland, all the way down to Dartmoor and Exmoor down in the southwest, and including 3 Welsh parks as well. So we're 15 parks and we cover about 10% Great Britain's landmass, and we're 15 separate national park authorities rather than one unified group. So that's just a little bit of background on the national parks. I'm very happy to answer questions later. But we're going to talk about Revere, which is this partnership between the national parks, my entity, National Parks Partnerships, the one that I help to run, and Palladium, the company that Ross works for. And it's a partnership that was set up to solve a problem, which is there's lots of great nature restoration work happening in the UK, and lots increasingly more specifically designed nature-based solutions type projects where nature is enhanced and restored and actually deliver ecosystem services like flood reduction or carbon removal. Lots of these projects are happening, but they're not managing to access funding at scale. So there's a bit of a gap between the project development and the ability to fund this work. Some of the work can be funded through government funding, but a lot of it actually is much more suitable for private financing through investors and through companies, potentially through more commercial means. And that's what this collaboration is set up to do. That's why we created Revere. Revere is the name of a collaboration between the UK's national parks and Palladium. And on the national park side, we're those 15 national parks. We're my entity that's called National Parks Partnerships, that's set up to create commercial partnerships for the parks. We cover this 10% of Great Britain, and we work to make our national parks healthier, protected, enhanced in many different ways. And Palladium is a privately owned company, and it's a global company that delivers a whole range of impact-led projects across the globe. But they do have a nature part of the business, and they are very experienced in developing nature-based solutions projects and incubating new nature-based solutions kind of ideas around the globe, and advising strategically in all kinds of nature and sustainability issues. So it's quite unusual in the UK to have a collaboration like this. We don't know of any others that exist out there, but together with both the national parks expertise and the expertise of Palladium, we've been working together since 2020 to come up with solutions of ways to get financing into nature at scale. So our goal is to scale nature restoration across the UK by developing landscape scales of big projects that work for everyone involved: landowners, farmers, communities, the ethically aligned businesses and investors as well. So it's quite a lot of stakeholders. It's quite complicated. And we're going to try and give you the headlines today. On to the next slide. So we do have a big challenge in the UK, and I think a lot of you will be well aware of this, and it's much more mainstream than it was even 5 years ago. We need to restore so many of the UK's natural landscapes. We need to do that for the sake of biodiversity and just for the sake of nature, but also to help us as a country reach net zero by 2050. Because in restoring nature, we can actually do quite a good job often of avoiding emissions or actually sequestering, removing carbon dioxide from the air through things like trees growing or peatland stopping emitting. So our natural landscapes in the UK and ecosystems are quite depleted. So here's the depressing stuff. The UK's got tree cover of just 13%, which is one of the lowest in Europe. Only a very small percentage of the 2.6 million hectares of peatland in the UK are in a natural, healthy state. So when peatland is natural and healthy, it's kind of absorbing water, got moss growing on the surface, it isn't muddy and full of gullies, and actually it stores all the carbon in the soil underneath it. And when it's dried out, it releases that carbon. So there's most peatland in the UK is dried out and actually emitting carbon. And our wildlife is really struggling. A quarter of our native mammals are at risk, are categorised at risk. But there are commitments to reverse that and to work on that. And the government has set various commitments around protecting and restoring landscapes to make that better. And that's why nature-based solutions are a really important way of helping to kind of reverse these problems. Okay.
Shall I come in, Naomi, and put a little bit of flavour to these quite depressing statistics?
Please do. Thank you.
So, as Naomi described, our natural landscapes are in a bit of a state. And I had it summarised to me a couple of months ago when someone described the UK as a small, wet desert, which is quite offensive and rude, but hard to argue with when a lot of our natural landscapes look a bit like this. Absolutely stunning. This is in Scotland, where I'm local. Absolutely stunning, but there's not a lot going on here on the nature side of things. This is in Loch Lomond in the Trossachs. Again, stunning, but nature-wise, not a lot going on. Naomi touched on peatland there. Peatland is so important and covers loads of the UK and stores so much carbon. UK peatland stores as much carbon as the entire forests of the UK, France, and Germany combined. But when it's in this degraded state where the soils are exposed, it's releasing carbon into the atmosphere by the ton every second. So it's quite anxiety-inducing. And so these are our really rural landscapes. But when you look closer to home at our important working landscapes, these have all been optimized for outputs. Subsidies are being squeezed, margins are being squeezed, and as a result, nature has been squeezed out. And our landscapes looking like this are a bit of a problem for two reasons. The first is that they're not sequestering enough carbon and they're not storing enough carbon, and they're not helping with biodiversity at all. There's not a lot of biodiverse hotspots left. And in addition to that, they're a lot less resilient to the increasingly devastating impacts of the climate crisis. The land now isn't set up to literally weather all the crazy storms that are happening because of climate crisis. We're having increasingly intense rainfall, and this is leading to flooding, is leading to soil erosion. And all of this is creating quite a big array of environmental issues around water quality, something that you'll all be very familiar with. This is unfortunately in Lake Windermere in the Lake District right now, which is suffering from a lot of algae blooms from nutrient runoff, rainwater running off the slopes of the hills into the lake, causing a bit of a problem there. So, big challenge, but the UK government has set really ambitious goals for nature restoration. And this includes the creation of 30,000 new hectares of woodland every year. That's the equivalent of a woodland the size of Edinburgh being created every single year. restoring loads of peatland and addressing this quite severe biodiversity loss. So for us in the national parks, this will require a integrated landscape scale approach. So on the screen now, we have what is quite a typical national park landscape. It's privately owned by multiple people, there's farming, and it's a working landscape. So we are not proposing to come in and just carpet the entire place in native forests. Our goal, as I say, is this integrated approach, working with local landowners to identify the best places for nature and basically just creating more room for nature. So we're creating habitat corridors, we're turning only low productivity farmland into new nature restoration, and it's all farmer landowner led. So we've got the vision of what we want the land to be, and we've got these really ambitious targets set by the government. But there exists a quite huge barrier to achieving these targets, and that is the nature funding gap. And this is the investment required over and above existing government funding for nature restoration. This is the funding that is required to get us from our current position to this vision that we have on that previous slide. And there's a few estimates going around of what this figure is. And the Green Finance Institute, for example, have estimated around 56 billion over the next 10 years. And so bridging this gap is what we're trying to do with Revere. We're trying to connect ethically aligned businesses and investors with amazing, big-scale, investable nature opportunities in the national parks. And now, Naomi, I'll chuck it back to you to tell us how we're doing it with Revere.
Okay, so here's a rough map of the parks and how they're distributed through the UK. And it's all about scale, as Ross has said. You can do small interventions of this sort we're describing, planting more woodland, planting some peatland, and all of that makes a difference at a local level. But we know with the challenge of the biodiversity crisis and the need to get to net zero, we need to work faster. That means scaling things up, and that means getting that funding in as soon as possible. So we've got the benefit of the 15 national parks existing in the three nations of England, Scotland and Wales, covering large landscapes and also having contacts and links to the landowners across these landscapes and understanding the needs of the community. And also every national park has its own landscape management plan. So they will have set their own sort of vision for the landscape. And although the parks themselves can't make that happen, they don't own the land in the national parks, they can set a vision and they can take action to help make that vision happen sooner. And a lot of those landscape plans do have their own targets for increased woodland cover, peatland restoration, water interventions like, re-engineering rivers so that they wiggle more and do for nature, more for flooding and more for biodiversity. And so that's why the national park seemed like a logical place to start and to collaborate together to try and come up with ways and structures to bring more funding into nature-based solutions. So as Revere, together we work with the private sector in three main ways. Many companies, as you know, and you might be involved in it yourself in your professional life, have set themselves net zero targets where the priority is to reduce your emissions as a first step, but then eventually to offset any residual emissions you might have that you can't just remove completely. And also, whilst you're on your route to your net zero, you should be doing things to support the sequestration of carbon. Here's a good stat here. So that first way we work with companies is for those who are looking to create their pathway to net zero. We find that many of them are looking to acquire carbon credits. Now, traditionally, that's happened buying them in the tropics, quite cheap carbon credits. There's been a lot of press around how high quality or credible those carbon credits are. And the good news is that you can access carbon credits through nature projects in the UK. And that's part of what Revere is trying to do. There's also been, sorry, do you want to go back a couple strands? I'm zigzagging a bit for you, which makes it hard. So one thing we do is we work with companies who are looking to access carbon credits, and we can design projects that will help them access carbon credits. They can pay us for those projects and receive carbon credits down the line that will help them against their net zero targets. Another way we work with the private sector is purely on the philanthropic side, actually. We've got quite a lot of partnerships where the companies are not looking to acquire carbon credits, but they like what we're doing. They like the national parks, they like the nature restoration stuff that we're doing, and they just want to support it in a more philanthropic way. And so we work with quite a lot of companies who just are helping to fund either our pilot activities, our innovation side, or actually the work itself sometimes, with no expectation of carbon credits or anything like that. They just want to say that they've helped this work to happen, this restoration work to happen. And the last thing we do is much more on the investor side. And when we say investor, we mean those entities who are true investors. It's not philanthropy. They're looking to, they might have £10 million they want to deploy into UK nature. They want to capitalise a project. They want to then get the carbon credits back, and that will be an asset that they own that provides a return to them, and it might provide them with their 8-10% return they want over a 20-year period. So that's kind of the investment side of what we do as well. So we do those three things. And we can probably skip over the net zero. I did that. I'm going backwards and forwards. But net zero plays into the work we're doing. And what we're not doing is what some companies have done, which is helping big companies to buy land and then to do stuff on that land so that they can sort of say that they've ticked a carbon credit box or that they're carbon neutral or whatever. And there's been some examples in the press where it's not really gone down well. Brewdog bought up some land, and it's controversial as to whether they're doing the right thing, and talking about a great land grab in Scotland where some companies or private entities have bought up estates from landowners just to plant trees. Some of that is great, but it's not part of our vision. Our vision is working with existing landowners and farmers who need to have a viable future business and they want to stay in farming, but they want to find ways to integrate nature restoration into their business model so they can earn money from it in an ethical way. But they're not looking to sell up and shop out to private entities. So this is our approach. Or are you talking about this, or am I talking about this? I think it's you, isn't it, Ross? Me?
You can go, or I can go.
I'll do this and then we can hand over. So this links into our new approach for developing nature carbon projects. There's a few principles around it. So that first one is working with existing landowners and farmers. That's our work. And we're not trying to facilitate the sale of land to private entities. We work with businesses to understand their carbon offset requirements, and we try and match that up with the creation of projects to help their carbon needs. We work with existing farmers and landowners, and we design up projects that generate the scale of credits required. Then we design a whole model of restoration that works for the landowner and the business without the acquisition of land. Now, this is really complicated. Making them add up, the economics work for these projects is quite difficult because it's quite costly to do things like to do it properly, woodland planting or peatland restoration, and then to ensure that everyone involved in it, particularly the landowners, are paid fairly over the multi-decade, and to still be able to sell a carbon credit that isn't ridiculously expensive. So you have to keep the cost of your final product down within reason, but you need to be able to pay everyone properly as you do that work. That makes for quite a difficult model, but that's what we've been working on for several years, and we think we've just about cracked it. We do all the coordination of all the implementation partners, because that can be lots of different people. It can be auditors, landowners, national parks, local NGOs might be helping to deliver the work, contractors. It's pretty complicated. And then, of course, overseeing the delivery, monitoring and verification of these projects. They happen over multiple years. You need to keep a close eye on them. You need to be able to track them so that things like carbon credits get verified. So that whole data and MRV piece is really important. So those are the kinds of services that the Revere collaboration provides to these projects. An example of a company that we've worked with in this space, Santander UK, and they came on board quite early on with our Revere partnership. They've got their own net zero target. They're also a founding member of the Net Zero Banking Alliance. And they came on board quite early. They learned about what we were doing and really wanted to just get behind it. They liked the innovative approach of it. They liked the idea of trying to create systems that would help private finance flow into nature. So they funded some innovation work. They have funded a series of innovation projects with us. But they've also funded nature restoration projects. They've done some philanthropic funding. They're just funding some nature work for the sake of it. They've also done funding of peatland restoration in the Cairngorms, and they have acquired and are acquiring some carbon credit as a result of that work. So they've done a bit of everything, actually, Santander, a bit of carbon offset, a bit of philanthropy, and a bit of innovation funding as well. So they're a really great partner, and we continue to work with them. They're such a good partner that they even sent their people to carry logs and heavy and horrible things across the bogs in Scotland. And this is them, you know. So volunteering is a big part of what we do as well with our partners. The Estee Lauder companies is another example of a company we've worked with. They've come more from the philanthropy side of things. They wanted to support innovation in UK nature-based solutions. It's in the public domain how much they gave us. They donated £500,000 over 5 years to fund pilot activities. So every year they support a different innovative project, Revere project. To date, we've done 2 of them, South Downs and the Lake District. What they've helped us to do is to do that early stage design, building those economic models, working with local stakeholders to work out how a catchment size project would actually work. And what they're doing is helping us to learn about both the landscapes and the economic models and get those projects closer to investability. So that's absolutely crucial work, and Estee Lauder have been a brilliant partner and continue to be a great partner in this space. And so that's a couple of examples, but clearly we don't only want 1 or 2 partners. We'd like to have many more. And we've got, this slide is to give you a sense of like the scale of it. So in the last 4 years, we've been building up our pipeline of projects. We've got 41 of them in the pipeline. Some of those are quite early stage and some of them are quite close, investable already. The level of private finance that those 41 projects requires, if they were all to be capitalised, is £254 million. That's not the total cost of delivering those projects. That cost is actually higher. That's just the funding gap that Ross is talking about that we need private finance, because we can use some public subsidies to support some of this work. So there's that £250 million worth of private financing opportunity at the moment. And the projects that we have modelled would, if they did all happen, they'd sequester about 8 million tonnes of carbon. And at the moment, some of the biggest projects are along Lomond, Cairngorms, just because there's so much capacity for tree planting there. But also down in the South Downs, we've got a really big project that's quite close to investability down there, which is really exciting. And the Lake District, there's a water quality as well that I think Ross is going to do a little bit more about.
Sure. So one of the projects that has been supported by both Santander and Estee Lauder Company is trying to address the water quality problems of the Lake Windermere in the Lake District. It's the UK's largest body of water. It's like a national gem, but it's in quite a sad state of affairs. It's got these toxic algae blooms that are at times making the lake unswimmable and having quite detrimental impacts on wildlife. So what we've done with that amazing funding from Santander and Estee Lauder companies is map the entirety of the lake to understand where this pollution is going into the lake. With an understanding of that, we can then design nature-based solutions to prevent this runoff into the lake. And these nature-based solutions can come in the form of riparian woodland. This is woodland planting along waterways and rivers that are flowing into the lake, and wetlands. All of this will stop runoff, will slow the phosphorus flying into the lake, and ultimately hopefully address the pollution problem. And So with this design work has been ongoing for 2 years, we've now reached a stage where we're looking for investability, and that is looking at around about 5 million to 10 million in funding, but support can range quite a lot. So that is an active project that we're looking for supporters on. If there's anyone within the 17 of you here who's looking for an amazingly impactful project, let me know, because this one's could be quite a big impact. And so, yeah, I think we'll conclude there. Been really, really lovely to speak with you all. I think, Robert, if you'd like to lead the Q&A now. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks. I'll just stop the recording now as well.